y'all. How's it going? So, we are now moving on to our section about Darwin's theory. And here, let's just look at some of the questions that we're going to be focusing on in this section. We will be looking at what important observations did Darwin make on his journey or his voyage? How did Darwin account for the diversity of species and the differences between similar species? And then how does natural selection lead to evolution? Now, here's one thing I want us to start off with was first, who is Charles Darwin? When we think about Charles Darwin, many of you may think of him as a scientist who came up with the idea of evolution by natural selection. You might have heard that online. You might have remembered that from our discussions that we've had previously with this section, or just might have come across it previously in science. That's who he was. He was a scientist who ended up traveling around the world, made a lot of different observations, came up with a theory, or came up with an idea, and then later turned into a theory after many tests were created, because we want to make sure we're focusing on the correct use of theory, because it's not just an idea, it's something that's been tested multiple times. One thing I would like to touch on is that Darwin actually was not the first person to propose the idea or the theory of evolution. Back in the early 1800s, a well-known French naturalist who was named Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, he also developed a theory of evolution. So this is around the same time as Darwin. Lamarck thought that the changes in an organism occurred during its lifetime, so it could be passed on to offspring. So he thought, for example, that giraffes could actually they first would stretch their necks to reach the leaves on tall trees, and that these giraffes would have offspring with longer necks because of the stretching. And the ideas often became recognized as his idea of the inheritance of acquired characteristics. I know that's kind of a vague term, but it actually was found that this theory was incorrect, that changes in an organism cannot be passed on to its offspring unless they are controlled by genes. So it's not just something that's just going to be passed off to them. They can't just stretch their neck and all of a sudden the next person's going to have a longer neck. It doesn't work that way. But just so you know, Darwin wasn't the first one to have this idea. There were others, but he was the one that's kind of had the most credit, been most well known. So first, when we look at, let me get my pointer here, or laser pointer. So he had this pretty intense journey, okay? So he left on his British ship, first starting from Great Britain over here, back in around 1831. And he went on this long journey. He left going around the coast of Africa, and then actually ended up connecting with South America. He went up and down the coast of South America, around Cape Horn, and then came back up toward the other side of South America, just kind of keeping along the coastal line here. Once he left South America, though, it's this part right here, this section is like the key part of what we're reading about, is his observations that he had between the mainland of South America and the Galapagos Islands, which was pretty decently far from South America. So one thing he did note was that there was a lot of diversity among the living things that he was seeing in all of these areas where he was traveling to. That there was also some remains of ancient organisms, and that a lot of the characteristics of organisms on this Galapagos Island right here, which was the biggest part, they were very similar to what was on the mainland. So this is where he started getting his ideas, was from these observations that he was making while on his journey. What struck him about these observations was that he seemed to be amazed by just how much diversity he was seeing throughout all of his travels, and that he started to begin to wonder what happened to animals that had left that he ended up finding as fossils. what happened to them over time, and I mean their species, how it changed. So that was kind of where he starts to begin thinking about how organisms might have originated, and then at the same time why some of them didn't appear to change, but some did. So that was just one thing he was thinking about. Let me see. I'm gonna want to see if I can try and find a video for us to watch after this. But in this section, or this part right here, just want you to pay attention. We have his journey that he had, and I mean, he literally like went around the world, going from Europe down around the edges of South America, Galapagos Islands, key area, then a very long journey to New Zealand, and then hitting Australia, and then around a little bit of the coast of Australia, and then whoop, coming back around the other side through the Indian Ocean, and then back around the Cape of Good Hope to go once again back up where he originally came from, the British Isles in Great Britain. What I would like you to think about is, I already kind of talked about it, but what were the important observations that Darwin made while on his trip? So I talked about several of them, but I want you to tell me as the response to the question in the chat, or not in the chat, sorry, on the classroom, Google Classroom. So what important observations did Darwin make while on his journey?